Hello, Grand Rapids and all of YouTube. My name is Joe Elder alongside my good pal, Jeremiah Bannister. How are you, sir?
It's good. Everything is good, my friend.
That's fantastic. And this is PaleoRadio. We have plenty of great topics today, including all things political, philosophical, and dare we say religious.
Yes, we dare, we shall.
We dare and we shall.
Right.
Absolutely. So how was your past week, my friend?
My past week has been really eventful. I've been super busy. I edited some clips from our last episode, and so people can go, if they missed episode 4, they can go back and they can watch clips of it, and they can see where we talk about the KKK newspapers. That was fun. We talked about religious liberty and the RFRA amendment that Jace Bolger and company are wanting to pair together here in Michigan with anti-discrimination legislation. So there's great videos, a whole bunch of stuff, and I even posted a blog about the 10 books that changed my life, and you can go and check that out at paleoradio.us. So I've been busy, dude. I've been a busy boy. How about you? What have you been doing?
Oh, well, pretty much not being nearly as busy as you have. I've been spending a lot of time working with Southpaws Radio. I actually got a clip up on our Facebook there on Southpaws and connected on our Twitter, which is Southpaws Radio. I did a little bit of editing for them, but most part I spent a lot of time with my dog. So being a plain and simpleton like I am, that's what I did.
Right.
But man, we have a lot of great topics. The very first one that I have is a little bit more fun, a little bit playful. But we have a pastor that's pleased about Ebola, my friend. And not only is he pleased, but he's pleased because he thinks it could solve America's problem with atheism, homosexuality, sexual promiscuity in general, and also pornography.
Yes, so, of course.
Yes.
It's like the magic bullet of diseases. Like it can just take care just of those things specifically.
Dude, it's got heat sensor. I mean, it's attracted to non-religious people, and it'll wipe them off the planet. It's God's will.
Yeah.
Fantastic disease. No, this is a piece that I have up here. It's by David Badash. And it is entitled, Pastor Pleased Ebola Could Solve America's Problems with Atheism and Homosexuality.
Yes.
Pastor Rick Wiles is his name, a very interesting fellow. And this is his quote verbatim. It says, "Now this Ebola epidemic can become a global pandemic, and that's another name for plague."
Yes.
He says, he's telling this to his radio audience, "It may be the great attitude adjustment that I believe is coming. Ebola could solve America's problems with atheism, homosexuality, sexual promiscuity, pornography, and also abortion."
Right.
So, boy.
Right, because nobody would want to abort their children in a world ravaged by Ebola.
That's right.
People would just be like, "Oh no, just don't abort that child," and everybody would be like, "Dude, we're surrounded by Ebola everywhere. Like, do I want this child to come into this world?" Like, yeah, just a massive outbreak of Ebola is just going to stop abortion. Brilliant.
Exactly right. Well, it would get us to at least get those people to think twice.
Right.
He goes on to say, "If Ebola becomes a global plague, you better make sure the blood of Jesus is upon you. You better make sure you've been marked by the angels so you're protected by God. If not, you may be a candidate to meet the Grim Reaper."
This guy is really into phantasms. I mean, think about it. It's like you better have the blood of Jesus upon you. And I think that's I understand what they're saying, but I think it's a really vulgar sounding thing, that you're covered in the blood of another human being as a human sacrifice to please a God who would otherwise not be satisfied without the sacrifice. Right?
That's true.
The blood of that needs to be upon you. And to make sure you're marked by angels. Like, how would Pastor Wiley know? How would he know whether an angel had marked somebody for good instead of ill, other than just, well, they died?
Well, I think it'd have to be on an individual account basis, and that's why it's really hard to even put these things into context. People like Pastor Wiles here, they have to make solutions for the world, and they believe that those solutions come with radical ideas such as Ebola is created by God to kill everybody. That I don't like specifically. I mean, it's craziness. It's absolute craziness.
Right. And he's obviously not keeping up with the news. I mean, if you read about the people who are being just ravaged by Ebola, you're looking at Africa, and almost every story to do with the people that are suffering most from this, they're Christian people. You know, I mean, if he wants to look in the paper and see how it's working so far, I mean, God would have a real vendetta against black Christians in Africa. You know, well, screw them. You know, and it would seem that the places that are least likely for such an outbreak would be Western civilizations, right?
Yeah.
Western, educated, industrialized, rationalistic, right? This weird democratic, this weird culture, so to speak, that's where you wouldn't have the problem so badly. You know, I mean, so even just evidentially, if you just look at the newspaper and say, well, who's really getting bumped around by this disease right now? Who's suffering and dying because of this? He'd have to really do some explaining and say, like, did the angels, do they really not care to mark people in Africa? You know, is it is that a specific kind of Christianity maybe that God isn't happy with? Maybe
is God racist and God goes just going after black people in Africa? No, it's a lack of resources. The reason why it's hard to happen in a first world nation is because we have enough beds and we have enough IVs to give people the liquids it takes to be sustained and to fight off Ebola. Basically, bed rest and IVs are a great combatant to Ebola, but there's lack of resources in Africa, and it just so happens that that's where there's been an outbreak. So we know that it is controllable, but let alone all of that, we have a guy who says this is created for a reason, and I'm going to rationalize why that reason is, and I think it's the reason of God's coming to kill the people that I personally don't like. And that I think is absolute ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous.
Right. And he rattles off. I mean, look at the list. I'll say it again. Ebola could solve, and Joe said this earlier, it's a direct quote from the pastor, Ebola could solve America's problem with atheism, homosexuality, sexual promiscuity, pornography, and abortion.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what a specific listing of things, right? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, like you were saying, it's almost like a heat-seeking missile. Like it's the same way with Ebola, that it's looking for the gay people. Are you gay? Well, I guess I'm not going to infect you.
You're more susceptible to me.
Did you sign an abstinence pledge, or do you have a promise ring? Well, I'm not going to get you either.
That's right.
Right. I mean, how absurd, how ridiculous. And then Right Wing Watch, they obtained and published the audio of his comments. And just this week, he said this. He said, quote, that President Obama may intentionally spread Ebola using an ineffective vaccine, which would lead to Americans being forced into FEMA camps. Well, there you go. Wrapped up. Nice.
There it is.
Bow on top.
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's no real leaps required there in that line of logic. No.
Quit being a sheep, Jeremiah. Quit doubting it.
Right.
That's always one of my personal favorites, is the sheep claim.
So maybe, how many Christians and believers that he happens to like would take the vaccine, would get the vaccine if it was made? Most of them. That's the thing. Like, most of the people he would recognize as being Christians would probably take the vaccine.
Yeah.
And it's like so maybe, unless the angel maybe all of a sudden said, listen, you need to become a vaccine denier now because this specific one was prophesied about by Pastor Wiles. I mean, just bizarro land, man.
It is. And exactly like we were talking about, the heat-seeking missile, it has a way of weaving around and picking out specifically the people that he's been going after. So, I mean, that makes sense. Is this a representation of all Christianity? Absolutely not.
No.
In no way is it. But it shows how people can be so cognitively unaware of their surroundings, or how people just at a basic level have to find solutions to problems, and they'll create very grand, very, very huge explanations that are way beyond comprehension just to say, this, I have an answer. At least I have an answer.
Right. And, I want to say this, though, is that while I don't want to say that his views are indicative of the whole, I think there remains a curious line of thought within American Christianity that diseases or that natural disasters, that these things are in many ways connected with God's divine plan, that the people who suffer from these things, there's a reason why they suffer and that other people do not. So while I don't want to say everybody would believe that exact same thing, I think that it's something that doesn't fall deaf on many people's ears, many Christians' ears. I don't think it falls deaf on it. I think that a lot of them might say, well, I don't know how that happened, but God works in mysterious ways.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly right. Or look at when a disaster strikes a religious group or an area where there are religious people, particularly the one that they're defending, they don't see that as an act of God, like the Oklahoma City Twisters or the Oklahoma Twisters.
Mm-hmm.
When that rips through Oklahoma, which we know scientifically is an area that every year around that time we're going to expect that to happen. That's just an FYI. But when that happens and it goes through there, people will say, well, God didn't send that. No, that's just an act of nature. God's not in control of that. But God was in control when the levees broke in New Orleans because of the sin there.
Right.
See, it's just such a contradiction. Even though it's the same events, it's cognitive bias. It's taking information from two different places and placing different responsibilities to it. But I mean, it's very obvious, especially when you see it affect a religious group that they are predominantly keen of.
Right. Speaking of things going in all different directions and not working out as planned or changing mindsets midway through, Syria.
Yeah.
Syria,
yes.
Bro. This is a tough situation. The New York Times, and I'll encourage people to go check it out. The New York Times editorial board wrote an editorial criticizing Obama on Syria, and I'll rely heavily upon this for the segment, but it's really, really good. I encourage people to read it for themselves. I think it's great. But they begin by saying that President Obama has put at the center of a widening war by expanding into Syria airstrikes against the Islamic State, the Sunni extremist group known as ISIS and ISIL. He's done this without allowing the public debate that needs to take place before this nation enters another costly and potentially lengthy conflict in the Middle East. And I thought that, of the many things, I thought that right there runs throughout the rest of the piece, talking about how the one thing lacking, I mean, there's many things, they point out many things, but it's the public debate aspect of this, to say, what is this exactly? Who are these people exactly? Especially now that we have a new terrorist group.
That's right.
That's being thrown into the mix.
And this terrorist group is the group that's fighting Assad in Syria. They
Right.
also happen to be a group that is fighting us as a Western culture. So this is a mixed bag. It's a big group of messed up. But we have warlords that are opposing both sides, but they're getting funded by one of those sides, which is us. We're funding Syrian rebels, which are these small factions and these small, basically dispersed groups of Al-Qaeda, or not just Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist cell, but they're
Right.
small dispersed groups, and they're all in Syria, and they have multiple agendas, and some of them are receiving money from America to fight Syria, but at the same time using those funds to fight us. And that's a very honest and factual thing that people can look up and tell that we're doing. It's a circle. We're going after ISIS. We're also going after Assad and trying to remove power from Assad by arming rebels that are not necessarily for ISIS, but absolutely not for the United States.
Right. And it always gets back into the bad guy's hands. Always.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like, and this is part of the problem in the way that politicians present these kind of wars in the first place, to say, well, we need to ally ourselves with moderate factions. We need to, but yet not being straightforward with the people in the United States, saying, when we say that, we really have no control over what happens once we give them to groups that we deem to be moderate, and they rarely admit that these moderate groups are working arm in arm with people that the moderates say are not moderate. They say, well, yeah, you can't wage a war like this that we're doing. The moderates saying this. You can't wage a war like we're doing without having factions that are, these insurgent groups, these terrorist groups. You can't help but to have them in your midst, and they're going to get weapons, and in fact they do, and they do so craftily, and sometimes without the need to be crafty. They just oh, here's some weapons, or oh, these machines were left behind,
and
so we're gonna pick them on up and drive in a convoy down the road and videotape it. I mean,
that's right. Well, and that's the thing is, there's a lot of loose ends in areas where that are war torn, and so there's a lot of things lying around in Iraq and Syria right now that we don't want bad people to get their hands on, and it's easily accessible, some of those things. I mean, taking military bases without force. How are they doing these things? These are abandoned military bases with weaponry in them, armories. I mean, and this is actually happening. But ISIS in general, outside of Syria but involved in Syria, is a way bigger problem than most people think. It is more organized than people think, but there are different ways of going about it. We have to understand that throwing money at these problems and throwing money at people who are moderately opposed to ISIS is not really doing us any good. You know, the enemy of our enemy is not our friend in this case. We need to understand that very clearly. And my biggest deal with this whole my biggest problem with this whole thing is lack of constitutional or congressional approval. It was unconstitutional. We need to have a declaration of war so we know when this thing is going to end. We can't get into an extended war again.
Well, and the New York Times said that too. They talked about how Obama has failed to ask for or receive congressional authorization for military action. And it says this, and I'll quote, "The White House claims that Mr. Obama has all the authority he needs under the 2001 law approving the use of force in Afghanistan and the 2002 law permitting the use of force in Iraq, but he doesn't." That's right? And that I like the way they ended that, but he doesn't.
And then they went on to say in that too where he was drawing his approval from, correct?
Right. Right, he's given Congress notification of the military action in Iraq and Syria under the 1973 War Power Resolution.
That's right.
But the New York Times said that's not a substitution for congressional authorization, and they're totally right. Yes. They're totally right. And the administration's left with really no defense. It doesn't even seem like they've got much of a defense right now at all. They're just kind of scrambling and trying to find any piece that might work and say, well, we can run over here to this 2002 law permitting use of force in Iraq. That doesn't work. Well, there's a 2001 law approving use of force in Afghanistan. That doesn't work. 1973 War Powers Resolution. That doesn't work. And they're just all over the map with this. And it's left Americans in a place where it's hard to know, right, whether we even have the information to make some kind of a judgment on this, right? Like, and I liked once again, I like how the New York Times said it. Quote, "This isn't a full picture because Mr. Obama has not provided one of how this bombing campaign will degrade the extremist groups without unleashing consequences in a violent and volatile region." They're totally right. They're talking about blowback, right? For the listeners who heard this, it's blowback, right? Unintended consequences. You go in and you say, we're going to degrade a certain group of people and we're going to bomb them, we're going to do this. And it's saying, do we even have enough information about what this group is, what we plan to do, how we plan to react to reactions, etc., in order to understand whether or not it's a good idea, whether or not degrading them is going to. I mean, you could degrade Hoist Gracie probably. I could sit there and try to degrade Hoist Gracie, kick my ass.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, well, there would be unintended consequences.
That's right.
Of me degrading somebody, you know. Same thing here.
Well, and yes, there is blowback. People think in the movies the bad guy dies and that's it, right? You know, here's the bad guy. We've killed him or we've neutralized this person, and now the movie's over and the guy is over. But the reality is that even if you consider these people bad guys or the people are bad guys, they have family. They have brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, relatives that will take up arms in defense of their death if they feel it was an unjust death. And they'll probably do irrational things because they're hurt and they're feeling emotional pain. And that makes sense if you put yourself in their shoes and you can use empathy. But most people don't even want to apply empathy to the situation. They want to use othering and distance this group of people so far away from them that they don't want to associate with them in any way. They can say, they're nothing like me. They have a different religion. They look differently. They act differently. They even eat different food. They behave entirely differently. I don't want anything to do with these people. And it's a lack of empathy.
It's easy to bomb those people over there who look like that, who worship like that, who eat like that. It's easy to justify ridiculous, belligerent policies based on that idea of otherness.
That's
right. And you're totally right. The idea that just put yourself in somebody's shoes. Here's something I try to tell people all the time. I say, imagine for a moment that and we can actually just kind of jump on the bandwagon with the Ron Paul commercial ad during the campaign about what would happen if China went into Texas.
That's right.
And let's say that China came over and they bombed us, right? And let's say we were familiar with Chinese television and Chinese news, and that was what the world was watching and everything else. And we're watching this, and we're hearing China describe what they're doing to us in a way that doesn't seem very true to the facts on the ground, right? That we would be looking around and saying, well, they're saying, well, we got this terrorist. Well, you also got this wedding party, right? Yes. There was a wedding party over here, and you blew it up. The
That's
kids
right.
were at Chuck E. Cheese, and Chuck E. Cheese got blown up. That if that happens, it's not like, well, I guess it just happened. People are emotional, and reasonable,
yes.
right?
Yes.
There is a reasonable response to that is one of rage and fury, one that says, you murdered my kid. You murdered my friend. You murdered my mentor, whatever it might possibly be. And the idea that people would just live the rest of their life quietly and passively in peace with that in mind is just baloney. It's donkey crap. And you look at it and say, what's a more realistic scenario? That person who lost a family in an oops moment, blowing up Chuck E. Cheese or blowing up the wedding party. What's more reasonable? That person is going to just sit there and say, well, there's not much I can do, or that they would sit there and say, you know what, I've heard of these people who call themselves freedom fighters that are mocked and everything by the power that did what hurt my family, and I may want to know more about them, or I've got a friend who's involved with that. Who's in it, right, and especially in countries like Syria, right? Yeah. This is table talk for Syrians. This is stuff that they're intimately aware of. One would be hard pressed to find large numbers in their population who aren't aware of the rebellion, right? Who aren't aware of the Wahhabist philosophy and theology that underscores the actions and ideas that are being done by these groups. It just blows my mind that we advance policies with such being so naive. Right, and being so naive, and that it's peddled as though there's no blowback, there's no ramification. Let's not even talk about it. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, well, it's bullshit. It's bullshit.
Right, it is. It's total bullshit.
That's all it is.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's why it's not being cognizant or being purposely not allowing us to be cognizant of the emotions of people that we know exist. We know how people behave. And to further extend the example that you said with the Ron Paul commercial, when there are oops moments, there are accidental drones, or there is something that comes down there in an explosion that kills a friend or a neighbor, these people are not held by the Constitution. They wouldn't be held by the laws of that sovereign country. So if we use that same example of China doing it, they wouldn't be held by the bounds of the Constitution. They could indefinitely detain people. The Constitution means nothing to them. And if they had an oops moment, there's not even so much of as a sorry. Well, we weren't really sure if they were insurgents or not, but they were associating with the wrong people. We know that.
I wish I had my notes in front of me from an old segment I did back when I was in college, talking about a drone strike in Afghanistan, drone strikes plural in Afghanistan that bombed the wrong place. Right, that bombed, in this case, a wedding party, right? That was the one that stands out most in my mind. Bombed a wedding party. Officials denied it ever happened. And then, after more pressure, they admitted that it happened, but that it only killed people who were involved with Al-Qaeda. Then later, it was people from Al-Qaeda and people who were sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. Years later, after all of these false narratives being thrown out there and shoved in the face of the people who knew firsthand what happened, after all that time, admitting that maybe a large number of them were children, right? Maybe a large number of them were children, and in fact, that we really don't know if there was anyone affiliated with Al Qaeda in this particular wedding, but that an entire family of people, right? And when I say entire family, I'm not joking. Like where you have an entire
40.
name, right? Yeah, you have large numbers of family members who all show up, kids and uncles and aunts and grandparents, and they're all showing up. Boom, gone, wiped out, done. Wow. Their name is gone, right? Their family, their heritage, the traditions, the values, everything, dreams, hopes, aspirations, gone. And the response was offensive. It was a lie. It was an offensive lie by the United States over and over and over. And this is just one, I'm just thinking broadly of just one specific scenario, whereas this happens over and over and over and over. It is standard operating procedure at this point that whenever something like that happens, you don't admit it. You just don't talk about it. And then when you do admit that you did it, you claim it as a victory, and you just a bold-faced lie to say, well, yeah, we only got the bad guys. And then to gradually over time, only under pressure, only with a fire under the feet, will they gradually begin to be honest.
That's right.
To be forthright about this. That's right. You know, but this is standard operating procedure. This has become standard fare, and the idea that this isn't going to happen with what we're doing right now in Syria, it's absurd. It's absurd. It's so radically unrealistic not to be worthy of serious consideration. And what's so unfortunate about it is that so many people, otherwise serious people, that otherwise serious people believe to be serious, that they're saying these things seriously. And it's like, no, absolutely not. Don't give them an inch on this score, because we have papers of record that have informed us otherwise, have allowed us to see behind the curtain, to know what's going on, and this is old news at this point.
That's right. Speaking of seeing behind the curtain and knowing what's going on, and record.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
We have another topic here. This is an article from Sam Levine on Huffington Post. And you know what, I will openly say, and I don't want to speak for Jeremiah, but we aren't necessarily the biggest fans of the Huffington Post. Not that we don't like your writers, we don't like your pay structure, because you don't have one. It's BS, you should get paid, my friends. Anyways, let me continue. This is an article by Sam Levine. It's called Elizabeth Warren Calls for Investigation of NY Fed Over Secret Tapes.
Right.
And this is something that's just blowing up right now across the circuits politically, about Goldman Sachs being involved with a bunch of almost 46 hours of tape, almost 50 hours of tape, of plenty of pandering towards banks. But more specifically, I can read on in the article, it's Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is a Democrat from Massachusetts, along with Sherrod Brown, who is also a Democrat from Ohio, are both calling for Congress to investigate the New York Federal Reserve Bank after a recently released secret recording shows the central bank allegedly is going light on firms it was supposed to regulate. Warren and Brown, both members of the Senate Banking Committee, called for an investigation of New York Fed after Carmen Segura, a former examiner at the bank, released secretly recorded tapes that she claims show her superiors telling her to go easy on private banks. Segura says she was fired from her job in 2012 for refusing to overlook Goldman's lack of conflict of interest policy and other questionable practices that should have been brought to their attention sooner.
Right.
So this is big news. This is very big news.
I heard this on This American Life. That's where I was first made aware of it. Was This American Life. It was also on ProPublica. I had not read ProPublica's piece on this. But Warren is saying this, quote, Congress must hold oversight hearings on the disturbing issues raised by today's whistleblower report when it returns in November, because it's our job to make sure our financial regulators are doing their jobs. She goes on, when regulators care more about protecting big banks from accountability than they do about protecting the American people from risky and illegal behavior on Wall Street, it threatens our whole economy. We learned this the hard way in 2008. And I mean, this is something that it seems almost like a given. I mean, it's I don't know It's hard to consider this news that big names are treated differently, right? If you have a lot of money, that you're a law unto yourself. I mean, this stuff is old news. This stuff has been shown under under strict scrutiny to be true, and so one of the things that she said happened was that while she was there to regulate what was going on, that you would have things that were said along the lines of too big to fail, or too rich to be prosecuted. And there was an interaction that she had where someone from Goldman Sachs said something so beyond the pale of what would otherwise be accepted by, I don't know, any other law-abiding citizen or citizen under the law for that matter. And she leaned over and asked somebody, did I just hear that right? And it was treated like you didn't hear that.
That's right.
Right? Like that's just the Goldman Sachs group. Like they're able to say certain things.
That's right. Well, and Goldman Sachs is running the dog and pony show too. They're making their long list of denials, but this is a correlation to, honestly, it's like the Ray Rice video, right? He got his punishment before, but once people saw the video of him doing it, it's a whole different ball game. And we're going to hear that with this almost 50 hours of tape from Goldman Sachs. They got their slap on the wrist, and everyone thought that was enough. But now when you actually see it, you hear the dirty, and you hear what's going on. I think that's going to put a real aspect to this. It's going to really piss people off. It's going to be something that needs to be done about the Fed. But speaking of what Goldman Sachs had said, they said the New York Fed categorically rejects the allegations being made about the integrity of its supervision of financial institutions. It goes on to say the decision to terminate Mrs. Segarra's employment with the New York Fed was based entirely on performance grounds, not because she raised concerns as a member of an examination team about any institution. Right. The bank added that it could not comment further on the tapes because Segarra is still pursuing a wrongful termination suit against them. Right. So, dog and pony show. Let's dance around it. But here's the kicker: we're going to hear the tapes. We're going to hear what you said, and we're going to think about that because we're not. We are apes, but we're not dumb apes. Right. We're going to figure it out.
Right. And there was an article, and I don't think it was on NPR, but it was talking about how Segarra got fired, and in 2012, Goldman Sachs received a rebuke, right, from a Delaware judge. And it was for its behavior during a corporate acquisition. I'll quote from this article. Goldman had advised one energy company, El Paso Corp, as it sold itself to another energy company, Kinder Morgan, in which Goldman actually owned a $4 billion stake, and a Goldman banker had a big personal investment. The incident forced the Fed to ask Goldman to see its conflict of interest policy. It turned out that Goldman had no conflict of interest policy. But when Segarra insisted on saying as much in a report, her bosses tried to get her to change her report. Under pressure, she finally agreed to change the language in her report, but she couldn't resist telling her boss that she wouldn't be changing her mind. Shortly after that encounter, she was fired.
That's right.
I mean, it's a huge deal. If it's proven, right, and that'll be debated whether or not Goldman Sachs has a conflict of interest policy. But to me, that seems to be a huge deal. If they don't have a conflict of interest policy, there's a problem.
Sure.
Right?
Well,
that's a massive problem.
Yes, and let's break this down a little bit further. The Federal Reserve is about as Federal Express. Right. They're a private entity that works outside of congressional hearings. We can call them in the same way we can almost call in scientists and talk to them. But the Fed operates outside of congressional approval. In 1913, we gave away our oversight of them. So they really are basically telling us that they regulate themselves. Don't worry, I'll look after myself. And then we come to find out that if this is true, if they are looking after themselves and we've given away congressional approval to them, they don't even have an oversight committee. They don't even have one. Like that is astounding. It's unreal. And Bloomberg View. Oh, go ahead, Christopher. Welcome in, by the way.
Thank you. I have a question. In terms of you were just saying that they may not have an oversight policy. Is there a federal law that requires them to have an oversight policy? And is that specific oversight policy something that's regulated?
But I don't. There's not necessarily a relationship with the federal government telling them they have to have oversight. We've only been allowed to audit the Fed once since 1913.
He's talking about Goldman Sachs.
I'm talking about Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs.
Right. if a Delaware judge requires to see it, then it would seem that it would be required, right?
Sure.
And I don't know beyond that. That's an interesting question, right? It is. It's a good one.
Yes.
Is that required? It would seem to be, but I don't know.
This is an article from Bloomberg View that it speaks to this pretty well. It's a Bloomberg View. The writer is Michael Lewis. It's entitled "The Secret Goldman Sachs Tapes," which is just basically talking about the same report. But he says, "It's an extraordinary document. There's not space here to do it justice, but the gist is this. The Fed failed to regulate the banks because it did not encourage its employees to ask questions, to speak their minds, or to point to the problems. Just the opposite. The Fed encourages its employees to keep their heads down, obey their managers, and appease the banks. That is, bank regulators failed to do their jobs properly, not because they lacked the tools, but because they were discouraged from using them," which I think is exactly the case.
Right.
It's not like we don't have programs in place that could audit the Fed, control the Fed, and apply an understanding around it that would be feasible, but we just don't do it. We will not go about doing it. The people that have the power will refuse to act on it.
Can I ask another question? What are the people that are so against having the Fed regulated? I mean, I understand, none of us were around the 1913s, so it's not like any of us had an ability to make that decision back then. But
I pre-existed myself, Chris. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
I'm a reincarnation of myself. I'm reincarnated always. Yeah.
I possibly lived through the Great Depression. I don't know, but I have dreams about it.
Right, deja vu.
But why don't we do that? Why has that not been a big push? Is that something that people are just avoiding because it's going to be a very touchy topic? Is it something that really isn't necessary, or is it something that it's because people in power who have money don't want that?
Well, Alan Greenspan was asked on Meet the Press. He was asked a question about the relationship between Congress and the Federal Reserve, and said that they're not under the Congress. In fact, there's no. They can be called before Congress. They can go, but it's kind of up to their own discretion. There's really nothing that Congress can require of them.
Yes.
Too much, given the way that it's currently set up. And
Yes.
Greenspan, I'll see if I can find that link. If I can, I'll try to share it on Paleo Radio's Facebook page at facebook.com/PaleoRadio.
We'll have to find it and post it up. I do know that in 1913, Congress basically said we are releasing our oversight on you to do it yourself. You may regulate yourself, and you're going to have to report your regulations and report your oversight of yourself to us.
And we wouldn't allow anything else. We would not allow anyone else to do that. I mean, if the FDA did that, we're just going to let the FDA regulate it. Don't worry about it.
That's right. Well, and it's exactly, we get in this conversation a lot, Jeremiah and I do, about going down the wormhole of regulating the regulator. If government's going to play the role of the producer, or they're not going to regulate, that's just as crazy as having a private entity say they'll regulate themselves. Would anyone let a corporation just regulate themselves and say, don't worry, we don't need government regulation at all, we can just do it ourselves because we're good people? And the government's the same way. If our government's not regulated, if it is producing and it's not doing the regulation, someone will have to regulate that. So, I mean, it's just ludicrous to think about the Federal Reserve as an entity that can look over its own papers and do things as it pleases and just report to our Congress. They control our currency.
Do they have a system set up at the federal government where there's, we'll put it this way, where people have pensions and stuff based upon how successful they are regulating other businesses and banks?
No, but that'd be a very interesting idea. That would be something we could look into.
Because if that is there, then that should be all the more reason they should be regulated federally. And, I know we probably differ on how much regulation and small government versus big government between, just the three of us. We all will have a different opinion. But in my opinion, I think we could all agree on the one thing, that if you have the Federal Reserve separate from the government that is supposed to be regulating everybody, and here comes a conspiracy theory, it's proven to be true, that should wake everybody up to the fact that they are part of the financial crisis that we're in, no matter what anybody wants to say.
That's right. Yeah. And there are people, there are economists that are fringe economists, guys like Peter Schiff, that people kind of laugh off, but they predict things like the banking crisis, or they predicted housing crisis, and I know they always do gloom and doom, but the the standard measurements of markets are off right now. We have 19 million people unemployed, and we have record-breaking numbers on Wall Street right now. That's a problem, fellas. And we know there's something to do with how the bank is regulating low interest rates and keeping interest rates too low for too long, and that devalues our currency. And this is a real thing. And I'm very interested in what these tapes have to say about Goldman Sachs and what's going on.
I'm interested in an area of disagreement that was brought up on my Facebook wall. And I'm so glad Christopher Tanner, we didn't really do much of an introduction for him. Christopher Tanner, PR director for Atheist Analysis. We always love when he jumps in on the action. I was afraid today, actually, dude, that you wouldn't be able to make it. I was sweating here, brother.
Yeah, I'm a little tired from last night, and actually I think I'll come down with something because I got 4 hours of sleep. I had to get the kids ready for school, and then I woke up and I just had a fever, so I went back to bed and I missed your text.
Well, orgies typically go late into the morning, so
that's right.
All right. So all right. Anyway, here we go. You posted a link on my wall having to do with Rand Paul, and it was speaking at the Values Voter Summit, a conference hosted by the Christian-leaning Family Research Council in Washington. It actually the article is entitled "Rand Paul Plays Up Anti-Abortion Stance." Quote, "I am one who will march for life," and he said some things. Now, this took place, as I just said a moment ago, at the Family Research Council. I thought it was interesting that they put Christian leaning on there. I mean, it's like the Family Research Council is just unabashedly Christian. It's not like Christian leaning. I mean, it is hardcore. It is controversially Christian. But he said this, and this is his remark. I am one who will march for life and will continue to stand up in defense of life so long as I am privileged to be in office, right? We're in the privilege to be in office. The debate isn't really about whether government has a role in protecting life. The debate really hinges on when life begins. And then he goes on and says, I've held 1.5-pound babies in my hand. Don't tell me that 5- and 6-pound babies have no rights simply because they're not yet born. Were you surprised by his position, Chris, or did you think that posed a like?
No, I'm not surprised at all by his position personally. I never once doubted that he was a pro-life. Actually, I wouldn't even consider him pro-life in my opinion because he is such a hands-off government individual for the most part. Right. What I call him is he's just pro-fetus. He ain't pro-life. He doesn't want it to exist outside the room. He doesn't want to pay for the benefits that a lot of these abortion stances may need. He is called a pro-fetus, flat out. And I'll be offensive and I will say it. He is pro-fetus. He's not pro-life. And so no, I'm not shocked in any way, shape, or form by his stance. What the reason for the post on the wall is because we had a discussion, last week about presidential candidates and interest in this individual. And to me, what he said, coupled with all the other stuff that he has said over the past, year to 2 years about his abortion stance, this affirms it. We don't want him in office because he will go out of his way to make sure that pro-life or his pro-fetus stance is specifically catered to. I think that's an atrocity.
Here's where I have the contradiction, because he goes on and here's where his quote is, and this is why I think Rand Paul's a lot different than others, is he has a strict adherence to constitutionality about things. That's why he can be a fringe right religious person that I disagree with, but I think he has a level of middle ground. What he said is, my personal and religious belief is that life begins at the very beginning. He told the interviewer and former Obama advisor David Axelrod. Where is the law going to be? I think the law could find something in between that where we are now. Maybe there is an in-between, like when a baby is able to react to pain or viability. But he has things to say where he says, I think where the country is somewhere in the middle, and we're not changing any of the laws in this country, and we're not changing any of the laws until the country is persuaded otherwise, said the senator. Right. So basically he was saying, until there's a huge sway in public opinion, I don't think we should do anything.
And I think that's where I disagree 100% with him, period. It's not about public opinion. If we went on public opinion, there's a public opinion that we should be a Christian nation. I know that it's changing, but I don't agree with public opinion at all. I think, and this kind of gets into an objective moral and a subjective moral type individual. I'm more of an objective moralist, and I'll get crucified for saying that, I'm sure. But, he does say that. You're right. And where we're at now, I don't think is enough protection because it goes by the states. Each state is different. The more Christian the state, the more regulations that we have. So you go down to Texas, they're trying to get rid of all abortion clinics by circumventing the system illegally, basically by making these abortion clinic doctors have to do it at hospitals. And, well, guess who's not going to handle it? The hospitals. And so we're not in any way, shape, or form at a good crisis right now with the abortion topic. And if he wants to talk about where the viability and the reaction to pain is, I could actually pull out studies. I have literally notes upon notes upon notes about this. Consciousness actually technically doesn't start until you're 2 years old, really. That's roughly when they predict genuine, actual consciousness starts. And that's actually consciousness like you and I and Jeremiah, where the individual actually understands they're a being separate from just themselves.
True.
And the pain aspect...
Can you beat a 16-month-old kid?
No, you can't, but I'm not arguing for that. You're taking one part of the position. There's a whole big part of the pie. I'm just saying is if he's going to argue viability is based upon financial acumen. Where do we want to put our money in? I mean, because, I could have a 1-week-old baby. You could extract it right out of the mother's tube and grow it in a test tube and throw it in an incubator, and you have a baby, but that's going to cost us probably $500,000 to $1 million in taxpayer money to do that.
Yes, and I think in being objective moralist, I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't know what you'd like to call it, but I subscribe more to Bertrand Russell, where I have an overall utopia in my mind of what I want to be the correct way, which would be different than Jeremiah's and yours entirely. We wouldn't have the same utopia.
Right.
But anything that is moving more in the direction towards my utopia than away from it is something I'll accept. I'm not saying that Rand Paul's views on abortion are in my utopia. They're absolutely not. How he feels about drone strikes are. How he feels about government sizes, how he feels about the constitutionality of going to war. I agree with that as well. So there's a lot of things, and being that I'm not a one topic voter, I look at it as an all-encompassing thing. Morally, do I agree with him? Absolutely not. Fiscally, do I? Pretty much, yes. Yeah, I do. And I agree with how he feels about most wars. I think that there's a bigger picture with each candidate, and I can't reduce it down to one topic.
Okay, right. And that's fair. But if you look at what he talks about, and you go on to all of the social issues outside of the drone strikes. I mean, I actually agree with him on the drone strikes, to be honest with you. And I don't want to go to war either. I'm 100% of going to war. Those are two big things that I'm actually very against. We should get the hell out of ISIS. They're not a threat to America, really. And until they start coming over here, we need to stop getting involved in other people's business because we just leave them in ruins. But the difference is if you take social issues, and for me, those always line up in the biggest, And if you take all of his social issues don't support humanity. They're not a humanitarian aspect outside of, again, the drone strikes and the anti-war stance. And I'll be honest, and this may be speculation, and you could crucify me if it is, but in my speculation, the reason he's pretty anti-drone strikes and anti-war strikes is a fiscal reason. It's not as much a humanitarian reason. I could almost guarantee it might be a fiscal reason.
I think it's a humanitarian reason. He has an issue with the constitutionality of invading sovereign airspace without a declaration of war. I mean, that's almost all he'll talk about with drone strikes.
Right. Well, okay. and he's got positions on a wide range of things that libertarians differ from conservatives.
That's right.
On certain issues, specifically to do with the public square, to do with whether, how do you govern in a pluralistic society? Conservatives and libertarians disagree on this score. And libertarians oftentimes score quite high, in fact. Civil libertarians score very high on social issues, for the most part. Now, with Rand Paul, let me just kind of piggyback on something that Joe said. I'm of the persuasion that candidates, like almost anything else, that it's one of those praise where praise is due, criticism where criticism is due, and you look and you say, okay, what does this person believe on a wide range of issues? Not the ones really that they're stomping on from place to place, the 3 or 4 topics that they select to make their best pitch to their base. But their entire philosophy of political economy and culture and the like, and to say, what are the pros and cons? And in what way would their view on this matter impact other matters that I happen to take really seriously? So I think the entire voting thing, I think you need to be nuanced. I think you need to be willing to carefully examine different aspects, some that might be unfavorable, some that would be favorable, and see how they interplay with each other within the system as it's described and as it's practiced by the politician asking for your vote.
Okay, and we could go through all of his stuff line by line, and that. Right. I'll be honest, I'm the same thing. Yes, if I had one politician that I agreed with 90% on a one thing I don't, I would probably very easily vote for that person. But he's against. Okay, I just pulled it up here. He's against subsidizing solar and alternative methods for solar energy. And I disagree with that, only on the basis of the fact that because we don't have startup companies pursuing this effort, that creates an ability to go to war more because we need to control the oil. If we didn't have to control the oil, we wouldn't have to be over in some of these Middle East as much. Now, they could claim it's a humanitarian thing. I mean, Obama could claim we're going over to help Syria and to get rid of ISIS, but no offense. I mean, to a point, it still is about the oil. The ISIS controls $3 million to $4 million in oil a day, and which is what they're using to fund their armies.
Sure.
And that's I heard that on NPR.
You could reasonably list off a large number of things that you disagree with them upon, but it doesn't necessarily answer for other people whether or not, given their ideas about the political economy, about foreign policy, about fiscal policy, domestic policy, whatever it might possibly be, how they would evaluate those claims in their own grid as to whether or not they would vote for a person or not.
No, and that's fair. I just wish everybody... I guess I don't ever tell people they have to vote a certain way, but I just have to make sure everybody understands the issues. If we bring Rand Paul in, we're bringing in anti-gay marriage because his stance... And I'll be honest, he actually has a stance that I agree with in the aspect, not the original thing I just said, but in the aspect that Rand Paul wants to take marriage out of the tax code. I agree with that. I don't think it's a physical thing that could happen.
I do too. I agree with it. I agree with it 100%. Do you understand why he wants to do that?
Yes, I don't agree with why he wants to do it, but yes, I do understand why he wants to do it.
Yeah, the argument about it is, and this is just for the viewers, but Rand Paul's doing that by argument of saying the government shouldn't be in the business of a religious ceremony such as marriage. It's a separation of church and state issue. Separate government from marriage and just put it on your taxes the same way you put your employment. If I lie about my employment on my taxes, it'd be the same as lying about having a spouse on my taxes. I'd get screwed just as much either way. So the argument is remove the relationship between a marriage doctrine and the government. You could have social constructs based on marriage, but the ceremonies and who goes about saying who can get the ceremonies, all of that would not be involved in government, and then it would be up into the individual, which is something that I completely agree with. I think it's a way of cutting the head off the snake and not having the arguments back and forth in our culture.
Yes, and I agree with that, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I guess I don't agree with his reasoning behind it, because he also throws in there that he believes marriage is between a man and a woman. But who is he to tell anybody else that? I don't agree with that part, but I do agree. Yeah, we should separate marriage from government. Sure. Do you honestly think that's going to happen? Is that what we would call a utopian idea versus a reality idea?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so my point though is I agree with the utopian idea 100%. I like his utopian idea. The problem is, if we look at the reality of what's going to happen in the next 8 years, and that reality, he's going to deny all these people from getting married just because he wants his utopian idea to succeed. And unfortunately, that's just not a reality. If it was a reality, I would actually be on board with it. But it's not a reality. So why not grant marriage at this point? And then, if that's what he wants, why doesn't he push harder through the Senate to restructure it? I'm okay with that.
That's true. Oh yes, no. There's plenty of things. So I agree with that, and the fact that he does still vote. He does still vote for against gay marriage.
Right.
While saying it shouldn't be on the vote, he doesn't abstain from the vote, which that is something that I find very critical of Rand Paul. I think that I don't think he's a perfect individual by any means. I don't think anyone on the left really is presentable either.
No.
I think that it's a mixed bag of garbage that we have to sift through, and it's either do you want the half-eaten pastrami or do you want the half-eaten Caesar salad? There's nobody that is a good candidate that we're going to see. Period. And I don't think that Rand Paul would get my vote. In fact, I honestly, as someone who's as political as I am, I don't even know if I'm going to vote in 2016.
And there's, I guess, an argument to be made there. I think too, if you look at the field as it's kind of forming right now, when it comes to civil liberties issues, I don't know who would be better than him. What, Hillary? I mean, what's Hillary going to say about the NSA? What's Hillary going to say about drone strikes? What's Hillary going to say about a number of issues that civil libertarians take really seriously? I just don't see it, and I think out of the entire field, from a very pragmatic perspective, I think he's got a lot going for him. It doesn't mean he's the absolute best. It doesn't mean that he's not without his faults. It doesn't mean that there aren't issues that he should be just scathingly criticized on. It simply means that on some issues that civil libertarians and progressives and others, independents, that they take very seriously, that millennials take very seriously, that it seems like he's got his finger on the pulse on a lot of those things. And that's a very limited compliment to him, but it's a compliment nonetheless. So I wanted to. We're almost running out of time here, and I wasn't planning on doing this, but why not? Let's seeing that Christopher Tanner is on, we typically allow Chris we ask him to talk a little bit about things going on with atheist analysis, and I want to do it again here today to give us an idea not only for kind of what's been going on, but what if there's anything going on in the future.
Well, thank you. Excuse me. We just finished up a podcast last night with the Game Theory podcast, and we did kind of like a dual podcast, and we talked about gaming. We also picked up Seth on our other podcast, Moving Humanity Forward, that talks about being working with progression Christians and atheists and what's the best way to work with them together. So going forward, we just officially funded our Grilling with Atheists. We have a date set. It's not been released yet. We're just confirming with the homeless shelter, but we have a date set where we're going to go feed a bunch of homeless people during the day, and it was all 100% supported with funds from our viewers and from our friends and stuff like that. We have plans as well. Thank you. We have plans as well to start a second one, hopefully still this year. We don't know 100%. We have been offered a donor to donate enough to fund a second one if it's in their city. So we have a tentative one set up that we're going to work on this week, getting going, and then we're actually going to have one here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, if the weather prevails this year, if not the year after, and you guys are welcome to come. I know you guys both live in Grand Rapids, and so do I, so that's why we want to do it in Grand Rapids. Yes. And since other groups have not done that yet, we want to make a big statement here in Michigan to do it. So when we do it, you guys are welcome to do it. You can be a co-sponsor. You can have your name all over the place. I'm okay with that.
Thank you. That'd be great.
In the end, the goal is to promote it locally and get these things going in local cities so that we can get the local atheist community in those cities to go, hey, this is a good idea. We should do this again. And, oh, look, it wasn't really that hard to fund. I mean, yeah, $500 to $600, that's, I'm not going to lie, that's not a small chunk change. But, if you have, probably over 1 million atheists at least in the United States, even if everybody donated 10 cents, we could easily have funded, 100 of these things.
That's right.
So that's on the charity front. That's kind of where we're going. We just got our store officially launched. I believe this morning John launched it. It's not very pretty yet, but we have probably between 10 and 20 different types of shirts that we are going to offer at a very discounted price. We also are taking on some special sponsors. So Bedtime Bible Stories is going to actually post their book on our site, and we're going to sell their book on our site with a limited edition sketch. So if you guys are into collecting, or if your viewers are into collecting, if they want a limited edition sketch, we're going to have those in our books, and you will not be able to get that anywhere else. That will be literally an atheist analysis only thing. We're also going to be selling the Skeptic's Annotated Bible, and hopefully in the future we'll have a few more people that have some specialized products. So,
do you have any atheist analysis bow ties?
We're working on that. Trust me, because I would like a bow tie and a tie as well. So
right,
there
dude,
you go.
Yeah, you have to stay
Dapper Dans,
man. Yeah, Dapper Dans, dude. Yeah. So okay, I want to talk about one more thing, Joe, before we go, and then after this, I want you to say something about Southpaws too.
Sure.
But I read this. It's great, and I don't want to say too much about it, but it was hilarious. It was accuracy in media. Have you ever heard of accuracy in media?
I have, but I'm not very familiar. Just vaguely heard of them. Right.
Well, they have. Let me get this up because their header here, accuracy in media, and I knew right away as soon as I read this tagline, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I know where you're coming from. For fairness, balance.
Oh shit!
Accuracy in news reporting.
Oh, there it is.
There it is, dude. Like it's like, yeah, Fox News, right?
Yep, subset of Fox
symbol right there. Yep. But they were talking about a woman, a news reporter named Charlo Green of the CBS television affiliate in Alaska.
Yes.
If people haven't seen it, you can look up Charlo Green. It's CHARLO. Green is GREENE. And she resigns right there at the end of a segment. She's talking about an initiative in Alaska having to do with cannabis, and at the end she says that she happens to be the president of this specific organization that she just reported on, and that she's going to be dedicating her time to advancing it. And then says toward the end something along the lines of, "Well, I really don't have a choice, but fuck it, I quit."
Yep, pretty much.
She walks out, and I'm serious.
That's what she did.
Yeah, and excuse the expletive, but it's true. It's how, and she said it live on air, and to her, the host or the other anchor was just befuddled. I mean, confused.
High and dry, dude.
Oh, dude, like the camera came back to her, and she's looking like, I mean, just royally confused about what to do. Sorry about that.
Hung her right out on the line, man.
Right, did. Oh, yeah, really. And it was just grossly unprofessional. And I don't think it reflects very well at all on the initiative and the people involved in it. And so but what was so funny about this piece was this. There's a quote. I'll do two. The first one's this, quote, "In a new development, TMZ reports that Green allegedly smoked so much pot at home that her next-door neighbor's kid got sick from the fumes. The neighbor complained, was threatened by Green, and got a restraining order against her." And I thought, I'll end with that first one, and I'll do the second one in a second, but I thought what was so funny about this is that it doesn't indicate, it almost gives the impression that the next-door neighbor was next door when that happened, that the fumes, you can almost imagine, the window. Yeah. And the fumes are just wafting out to the house next door, and the kid next door is getting sick.
You know the old cartoon where the bear's walking by and he smells the pie and he's floating in the smoke all the way over.
Right.
That's exactly it. The smoke found its way into the little boy's nostrils all the way across the street.
I can imagine the writers of this, saying, "Well, you know what it's like if you've seen Breaking Bad. I mean, if you see the RV and the fumes coming out of that." It's probably the same way with marijuana.
Meth, marijuana, same thing.
Meth and marijuana, it's the same, right? But it doesn't indicate whether or not the neighbor had the neighbor kid in the neighbor's house. Like what did it mean? The fumes. Was the choice of that term specifically fumes?
Is the kid allergic to smoke?
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. It's always. You always have to look at people and say, listen, it's medicinal for some people. For her, it might be medicinal. If it is, I wouldn't want to be throwing Vicodin at kids, and I think there's a responsible way of doing what you're doing, and especially I don't know, I've never looked this up, and it's something you brought up that I said, that's a really good question about people if they have allergies to marijuana.
Yeah, or what about just allergies to peanuts? Can a next-door neighbor not have peanuts in their house because of one neighbor's kid that could go into anaphylactic shock, so no one on the street can have cashews?
Right. But it seemed really right.
It really is almost the same drawing the line. And I have to say this too, though. Is it harder to believe that a woman would say fuck it and just quit on air and for an interview, or would it be hard to believe that there's a black woman in Alaska?
Right.
Like, dude. It's impressive either way.
Right.
I just had I had to be noted. I thought it was odd.
Right.
No, it is. The allergy thing is an interesting topic, though. And what's the responsibility of a neighbor if someone does have a very obvious allergy?
Right.
Like say peanuts. You know, is there something that you can say about certain houses next door to this one house can't have peanuts because even smelling it could kill their kid? I don't know. I'm interested to find out. Maybe we'll have to look into it.
We'll have to look into that. You know, the piece goes on, and this is the second quote, dude. I'll end with this quote. Quote, whether Green had simply gone nuts on the air or else was demonstrating the effects of the use of the weed on her own mental faculties, the lesson was clear. The media can't be trusted to report fairly and honestly on the marijuana issue. We know the media have liberal bias, but this case caused us to wonder how many objective reporters covering the issue are actually secret tokers.
That's right.
Secret tokers. You're right. You're like, what does this mean? Like, what kind of a weird bubble are these guys? Are these journalists? I mean, you're writing in the saying we, you know, as if it's more than one. What kind of weird bubble are they living in? You know, like, can someone who's prescribed Vicodin objectively report on Vicodin statistics? Can somebody who plays baseball, somebody who enjoys or plays baseball, can they be sports reporters? Or is that like, listen, I don't trust your objectivity because you happen to enjoy the thing that you're writing about?
That's right.
I don't. It's
How
just
can I
bizarre.
trust you, baseball reporter? You played baseball when you were young. You have a biased opinion.
Right.
You're gonna tell me you loved it. You know, I can't trust him. Yeah, it is. No, that's exactly true. It's very true. It's interesting how we do this. Is there a liberal bias to alcohol? Is there a liberal, you know, there's a liberal bias to preference of alcohol. We all know that. I mean,
right.
You know, we know alcohol is very, very well accepted amongst all groups of people, and so is marijuana, to be frank.
Well, and saying, you know, whether she had simply gone nuts on the air or was demonstrating the effect of the use of weed on her own mental faculties, they treat it like this either or. That you're like, you know, there's a middle missing there. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it and saying, you know, can people have people resigned in belligerent manners from jobs who don't smoke weed? Right? Like, I mean, have people done things like what's the one sports video, dude? Boom goes the dynamite.
Yes.
Right. Boom goes the dynamite. Did that guy go nuts on? Was he literally insane? Was he? No. Could we say maybe he was on the? Maybe we don't know. Maybe he is a secret toker. Well, maybe he was affecting his faculties, or maybe he was nervous out of his mind.
But maybe that's the effect of being sober.
Right. Right.
Maybe that's the natural effects of a sober person on the air. We don't know. There's so many strange tokers around. We don't know where they are. They could be anywhere.
Right.
You know, I just think it's weird how they assign a behavior. If they know someone smokes, anything they do is assigned to the behavior of a smoker. Right. We don't do that with cigarettes.
Right.
You know, but
we don't do that. We don't do that with tons of things. We don't do that with caffeine. We don't do that with caffeine. Caffeine definitely impacts the way you behave. And yet nobody's like, well, maybe she had 4 shots of espresso before she got on the air. I mean, that's just not even part of the story. But that's apparently not on the agenda for people who are claiming to be fair and balanced in their approach. And I don't know how that's balanced at all. I don't know how it's fair. I don't know how it's balanced. I don't know how it's freaking accurate. It doesn't. It lacks every single one of those qualifications and markers. Strikes out. 3 strikes, they're done. They're done. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Before we go, say something, Joe, about Southpaws, man.
Yeah, Southpaws. It airs Tuesdays and Wednesdays on 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. That's locally here in Grand Rapids. But it does stream over the airwaves across the entire world on publicrealityradio.org. But there's a live stream connected to it. You can also follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. We do small mashups of our shows if you don't like the big, chunky political stuff. It's pretty much political satire. We do a lot of fun things on there, so check us out.
I'm excited about this, man. And I always enjoy, we do this on Mondays, and then Tuesdays and Wednesdays you're busy with Southpaws, and I always enjoy hearing what you guys are talking about. So I encourage people to learn more about the show. Just learn more about it. Find out more about the hosts on it, the topics on it. It's fun. You can call. It's a live call-in program.
That's right.
So, really, really, really fun. And they're a podcast, correct? You can download podcasts.
Yep, we're a podcast, and we have all of our archive shows at publicrealityradio.org. You can just check and click on Southpaws as every single one of the archive shows. And yeah, we have a lot of fun. My other co-hosts, Darren Gibson and Jim Gerner, are really smart guys, very politically sound, and we enjoy it.
That's awesome, bro. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone in Grand Rapids and around the globe for watching Paleo Radio today. Make sure to share it with your friends. And listen, if you're sick and tired of going to work and hearing your coworkers blasting Limbaugh or Glenn Beck or anyone else, challenge that. Okay? Challenge that. Play Paleo Radio. Crank it up to 11.
That's right.
And let people hear something independent, fresh, new, sexy, right?
Yes.
And right, allow them to become familiar. Familiarize them with new media here in Grand Rapids. And so thank you so much. Thank you, Christopher, for being here today. Thank you, Joe, for being here today. Thank you, everyone watching, for being here. And make sure to tune back in next Monday at 10 o'clock, although it might change, in fact. So go to our Facebook page and our Twitter. You can find us on Twitter at PaleoCrat, PaleoCrat, and on Facebook at Paleo Radio. And remember, Paleo Radio is one word. So keep your eyes on that, and make sure to be back next Monday. Until then, treat each other right, and have a great week. Okay? Yeah. Bye. See you guys.